Janet moved quietly through the office, her cleaning cart rolling softly behind her. The familiar hum of computers and low chatter of early arriving staff filled the space. But her world was focused on her tasks, wiping, dusting, arranging, making everything spotless without being noticed. She had mastered the art of invisibility, a skill honed by necessity, and it served her well. Raising a child alone left little room for mistakes, little room for attention she didn't invite. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of Adrian Locke. He didn't seek attention. Attention seemed to follow him. He walked with the kind of ease that made people pause subconsciously, like the building itself acknowledged his presence. His dark, neatly tailored suits, the slight crease in his posture, and the calm decisiveness in his strides set him apart from the flurry of assistants and employees buzzing around him. He never spoke to her beyond a nod, but that nod carried a warmth that few people offered. It was a small acknowledgement. Yet it meant the world to her, a fleeting connection in a life otherwise spent in shadows. That morning felt different. The sun was bright, spilling gold across the polished floors and glass walls, turning everything warm and alive. Janet was in the middle of wiping down the last conference table when hurried footsteps echoed closer. She glanced up just as Adrian appeared, moving faster than usual, his face pale and tense. Something in his posture made her stop. Mid-motion, he clutched his chest, as though trying to steady himself, and his normally calm eyes were wide with strain. He tried to speak, tried to wave off the assistants who hurried toward him, but his voice faltered. Before anyone could react, Adrian swayed, then collapsed, papers scattering across the floor like a sudden storm. A scream tore through the room, followed by the frantic ringing of phones. Chaos erupted around her, yet Janet's instincts kicked in instantly. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from the surge of protective instinct that came from years of shielding her son from harm. She leaned over him, pressing her hands against his chest, trying to feel the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was weak, faltering, slipping away beneath her fingertips. His breath was shallow, his lips already tinged blue. Panic threatened to rise, but she pushed it down, focusing on what mattered. She had done this before, long ago, when her son had needed her. She whispered softly, almost as if speaking aloud could anchor him to life. "Please, stay with me." Her arms moved automatically, pressing, counting, moving with the urgency of someone who refused to accept loss. Every second stretched, heavy with fear and hope, and the office, the people. The chaos, all of it faded into a single point of focus, keeping him alive. Janet's heart pounded, matching a rhythm that was desperate, urgent, human. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught on the polished surfaces, but it felt distant, irrelevant compared to the life hanging in the balance before her. Time became elastic, seconds stretching into eternities, and Janet held herself steady, anchored by the sheer will to save someone she barely knew, but could not lose. Adrian's chest remained stubbornly still beneath her hands, his eyelids fluttering, but refusing to open. The office around them had descended into chaos, assistants shouting, phones ringing, some frozen in shock, others capturing the scene with trembling hands, but Janet barely registered it. Nothing outside the narrow circle of his body and her own heartbeat mattered. Her hands pressed harder, pressing, counting breaths, counting seconds that seemed to stretch into endless lines of dread. Sweat ran down her neck, mixing with tears that she didn't even try to stop. Her mind raced through everything she knew, everything she could remember from long-forgotten first aid lessons and moments of disparate improvisation with her son. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to keep going, to not let him slip away. And then, a thought flashed, an almost instinctive, reckless idea that seemed to rise from the primal depths of fear and love. Janet leaned closer, whispering, "Please, just stay with me," before pressing her lips to his in a desperate, controlled breath. It wasn't a kiss, born of desire, it was a plea, a prayer, a lifeline. She forced air into him, channeling every ounce of strength she had into each breath, willing his lungs to take it, willing his heart to keep beating. Tears streamed down her face, warm against the cold blue of his lips. The office went silent for a heartbeat, the collective shock of the people around them holding its breath, and then chaotically Adrian jerked, coughing, choking. As life surged back into him, Janet pulled back, gasping herself, shaking uncontrollably, whispering over and over, "Thank God, thank God." His eyes opened slowly, dazed, unfocused at first, and then they landed on her. For a moment, the world narrowed to just those eyes, confused, vulnerable, and alive. Her face was flushed, hands trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. And in that instant, the room, the cameras, the murmurs, they all faded into insignificance. All that existed was him seeing her, really seeing her, and her refusing to let him go. "You!" saved me," he whispered, his voice weak, raw with disbelief. The words barely carried, but they struck through the tension in the room like a spark. In darkness, Jeanette's chest heaved, and she offered him a shaky smile, unable to speak for the weight of relief and fear still thrumming in her veins. And somewhere in the back of the room, a phone continued to record, capturing every detail: the desperate courage, the intimate desperation, the moment a life had hung by a thread and been pulled back. But Janet didn't care about the recording, the whispers, or the shock. She only cared that he was alive, that he was looking at her, and that somehow, in the midst of chaos, they had found a fragile, fleeting connection between two worlds that rarely collided. The video spread like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, every corner of the company had seen it. The janitor who had saved the unshakable billionaire, the desperate breaths, the trembling hands. The moment his eyes opened to her, people replayed it over and over, whispering behind screens, sharing their interpretations. Some romanticized it, imagining a forbidden connection. Some mocked it, sneering at the closeness between a janitor and a man who seemed untouchable. Others debated the audacity of a single mother taking such risks. Janet wanted to disappear. She hadn't acted for recognition or attention. She hadn't acted for him or for anyone. She had acted because life demanded it, because instinct demanded it, and because the thought of losing him had been unbearable. Yet now, her private courage had been made public, twisted and dissected in whispers, in screenshots, in casual speculation. The weight of exposure pressed down on her, heavy and unwanted. Then came the call. Not from security, not from HR, but from Adrian himself. Her heart thudded in disbelief as she made her way to the executive floor, nerves coiling in her stomach. The assistants glanced at her curiously, sensing something unusual, but no one stopped her. When she entered his office, he was standing, still pale, still recovering from the collapse. Yet there was something undeniable in his gaze: warmth, recognition, gratitude that went far beyond a simple thank you. "Janet," he said softly, his voice rough around the edges, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." She shook her head immediately, stepping forward. "You don't owe me anything? You would have done the same for anyone." But he stepped closer, his voice catching, raw with emotion. "No." No one else even moved. For a moment, silence stretched between them, charged not with romance, but with something heavier, more human. He noticed the depth behind her eyes, the weariness of years carrying burdens alone, the careful strength she wore like armor. He asked her about her son, about her life, about things no CEO had ever asked a janitor before. Each word was deliberate, sincere, as if he was trying to stitch together a window into her world that had always gone unnoticed. When she finally left the office, Janet felt a shift inside her, a strange, unplaceable feeling that someone had truly seen her. Not just as a worker, not as a helper, but as a person with fears, responsibilities, and courage. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something like hope, quietly threading its way through the edges of her exhaustion. Over the next few days, Adrian found reasons, small, unforced reasons, to be near her. He didn't summon her for work or create awkward obligations. He simply appeared, carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold, precise man everyone else knew. Sometimes it was a quiet visit during her break, a cup of tea pressed into her hands, or a simple question about how her day was going. Janet tried to remain professional, to keep the invisible barrier she had perfected, but each encounter chipped away at her defenses. There was a softness in his eyes, a patience in his voice, that felt almost impossible for someone like her to trust, yet it beckoned. One afternoon, he suggested the rooftop garden, hidden oasis above the city, where sunlight pooled on the benches and flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Janet hesitated, unsure if this was appropriate, unsure if she wanted to step further into this strange closeness. But something in the sincerity of his invitation, in the unspoken trust in his tone, nudged her forward. She found herself standing by the railing, her fingers brushing the cool metal as she watched him approach. "You saved me," he said again, his voice calm but threaded with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude alone, but something deeper, something heavier. "But you also changed something." Janet swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," he reassured her, stepping closer. His eyes never left hers. "You made me realize why I've been running myself into the ground. I have everything, except something real." Her breath caught in her chest. She hadn't anticipated this, hadn't expected to be more than a momentary savior in someone else's life. She didn't want to be a solution to his loneliness, a pause in his grand, unreachable world. And yet, the vulnerability in his gaze disarmed her completely. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face with the gentlest touch. A gesture so simple, yet so intimate, that her pulse jumped. "If I'm crossing a line," he whispered, "tell me." She didn't step back. Instead, her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm just scared." "So am I," he admitted, and there was no pretense in his tone, no shield of wealth or power, just a man, exposed and trembling, standing in the sunlight beside her. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of flowers and city air. And in that quiet, suspended moment, both of them felt the fragile beginnings of a connection neither had expected but both silently hoped to explore. A week later. Adrian showed up at Janet's modest apartment, carrying a carefully wrapped takeout container and a quiet smile. She froze for a moment, startled that he had actually come here, into her world, uninvited yet so considerate. But it wasn't just the intrusion of a billionaire into her home, it was the softness in his eyes, the absence of the formal walls he carried at the office, that made her chest tighten. Before tension could settle, her little boy, Liam, ran forward with the unfiltered curiosity only a child possessed. He wrapped his small arms around Adrian's leg, looking up with wide eyes. "Are you the man my mom saved?" he asked, voice full of wonder. Adrian knelt to meet him, his hand resting gently on Liam's shoulder. "Yes," he said warmly, his eyes crinkling with genuine affection. "And I think she saved my life, in more ways than one." The room filled with laughter as they unpacked the food and shared the simple comfort of a meal together. For the first time in years, Janet felt the weight of isolation lift slightly. Here, in the hum of clattering dishes and Liam's questions, she experienced the warmth of a real family, not of pretense or obligation, but of genuine connection. Adrian treated her not as a savior or charity case, but as someone he wanted to know, to care for, to build something real with. Later, when she walked him to the door, the city lights casting long shadows across the hallway, Adrian paused. His gaze searched her face, lingering, hesitant. "Can I?" he asked softly, leaving the question unfinished, a delicate thread of vulnerability stretching between them. Janet stepped closer, her heart pounding not with fear this time, but with a growing sense of possibility. And when their lips met, it wasn't a desperate plea for life. It wasn't about survival. It was a beginning, tender and deliberate, carrying the promise of something neither had expected but both needed. From that night onward, everything changed, not because she had saved a billionaire, but because he had finally seen her, the woman who had always worked in the shadows, the mother who carried her son alone, the person whose courage and heart could not be ignored. And he chose her, wholly and without hesitation, as if the world itself had finally shifted to make room for them.